On my panel today are comedians Jojo, Sutherland and Scott Capurro. They're going to be here right until 6 p.m. I do wonder, Jojo, if you have any feelings about the Front Hole Museum and their new declarations about what you should and shouldn't say about women. I mean, do you think that girls and women, that phrase should be replaced with people who menstruate?
Honestly, my brain is fried with listening to that. When you were reading that, I'm just going, sorry, sorry, so who am I then? Because there was a bit that said women and girls should now be people who menstruate.
Yeah.
Well, women of a certain age don't menstruate, so who am I? What am I? What?
So, how would that work in that formulation? People who menstruate who don't menstruate? I don't know.
People who... formerly known as menstruators.
People formerly known as menstruators. Well, what's your problem? That sounds great. Why?
Perfectly fine.
Why are you getting sort of
introduce yourself
about
next
it?
time
That sounds great to me.
Yeah.
What
the woman who formerly...
The thing is, but also, I don't mind about adding things. It's the taking away. The idea that we just take away the term, and we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
You take away the word woman, and replace it with somebody else. But I want to be called a woman. I'm happy with being a woman. Why... You know, if you want to be called something else, I'll call you something else, but I want to be called...
I don't know about the Vagina Museum. I'm anxious about it, only because...
naturally.
I might avoid it, only because I only have about 30 minutes patience in any museum. Although, having said that, 30 minutes in the Vagina Museum isn't bad. It's not a bad record, is it?
Well,
really? 30 minutes in there, right, it's pretty good. Yeah, it's not bad. But for me, I think, when I go to a museum, it's to be enlightened and instructed, and have my mind changed about things, and not have my mind limited. Actually, frankly, to the word period is to some people quite questionable.
Is it?
Yes, in yoga class they do not say period. This has been going on for quite some time.
Okay.
They say women who are menstruating, and they back off from the word period because it has some sort of negative connotation to it.
Okay.
For me, none of it. I'm autistic. That's why I do so well in the UK, because it's really all about me. And and I think when I'm in a group full of people, I do try to respect people's boundaries and stuff. But what I'm afraid of with all of this, as a comedian, I'm seeing from our perspective,
absolutely,
from our prism, is that we're going to lose our sense of humor about some of this, and we're not going to be able to point out the ridiculousness of when you provide. I did a show last week. Near Hammersmith, and it was great fun. A very small room, but lovely audience. But there was a couple, obviously on a date, sitting in the second row, like this, arms crossed the whole time.
And best kind of audience members, right?
Yeah,
we're like moths, aren't we? We go straight to them. Everybody else can be laughing.
Exactly. Where's the failure? That's what we focus. But they became the fulcrum, because that's why I moved some of the energy toward them. And I think they enjoyed that. They wanted the show to be about them. Young people sometimes too. But also, I felt as though he was behaving at what he thought was his best behavior, because he didn't want to have that conversation in the car or in the taxi on the way home. That was my impression. But what I fear is that that's going to become some of the norm. I think that people are very conscious, especially comedy it can be quite middle class, because it's quite expensive to go to.
Right.
The audience can be quite... And I'm afraid that so many of my middle class friends, I don't include myself in this group, but they're so concerned about other people, with frankly not having any minority friends of their own.
Well, that's an interesting point.
It is.
To what extent... I mean, I don't know any trans people who would find the word woman offensive.
No.
So isn't this a bit of an illusion, really? I mean, maybe there are some, fine. The ones that I see online, though, they mostly describe themselves as trans allies, and they're not even really...
Even that illusion, I wonder as well. I mean, funnily enough, getting back to Ricky Gervais, he was interviewed a few years back about saying something, and the interviewer said, "Oh, do you think you crossed the line?" And his response was brilliant. He said, "I didn't draw the line. People choose where they cross the line." So are we expected now to try and second guess and
I don't know.
And that's the whole thing about comedy. You can't tell jokes that you think somebody will find funny. You have to find the funny first.
The problem with these words, though, is
but you don't know if you're going to offend anybody.
Exactly. For a lot of gay men, they don't want to be identified as gay, because that's a heterosexual recognizer that straight people use to make themselves feel more comfortable. It's like when people say, "Oh, I felt uncomfortable around her. I didn't know she was gay. It made me very uncomfortable." That's because they're afraid of what they might have said around her and how they might have embarrassed themselves.
Yeah.
So the word trans is, to a lot of people who are trans, they don't like that word, because they've never gone through a transition. They've always been that gender, whatever that gender is. It's up to them to label themselves. And the word trans is in a way useless because it doesn't really mean anything.
But this is very interesting because then you get the mantra "trans women are women," which is just thrown out there. I talk
so
about
why
that
have we got the word trans at all?
Why bother? I mean, I talked to Helen Joyce about this in the interview because she describes it. Well, she was quoting from someone else, but the phrase is a thought-terminating cliche. You just say trans women are women, and it puts an end to the conversation. But actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. And the idea as well that all trans people feel the same way about these labels is not true. But I noticed, just to give an example, George Takei, who used to play Mr. Sulu in Star Trek, he tweeted out saying that when you talk about biological sex, no, he said so-called biological sex, you are elevating transphobia. And then the trans writer Blair White replied saying, if there's no such thing as biological sex, there's no such thing as trans, right? So there you have a cis male saying, don't pretend there's such a thing as biological sex, which there is.
Right.
And a trans person has to come in and say, you're basically denying my existence then.
Yes.
Right, so this is not as simple as everyone seems to make out.
I think it might be easiest, though, for all of us to agree upon a word like, if a trans woman wants to be called a woman, then go ahead.
Yeah.
Call her a woman, that's fine. Take the word trans out of it. I'm fine with that. It doesn't even matter what I think. It matters what it's about what makes them comfortable and what makes them feel included in society. But what I'm worried about is that I can't make fun of Caitlyn Jenner anymore because she's hilarious. And as she peels back another layer of skin from killer to alcoholic to a guy to Olympic gold medalist to now, bring it on. Bring more to the table, right?
So
the
are
thing
you
that
saying
we want to include, of course we want, but we can't include if we're going to then start excluding in order to include. Because
so
then
are you saying that, so basically ring fencing certain people from ridicule is a sense a kind of form of discrimination?
Yes, it's how we flirt. If you take them out of the,
might be how you flirt.
When you're doing,
that's why I
spend a lot of time alone. But when you're doing a show like say New York or Sydney, Australia, in the audience might be all sorts of people, and if you leave one group out, they're actually quite offended and like, why didn't you make fun of us? We're from Belize. I'm like, I don't know. No, well, I'll research. I'll get back to you. I mean, people, they want to be taking them out and then hand-holding them. It's so patronizing.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why women and gay men didn't go to comedy clubs for a long time was because when they were included in the show, it was very negative, or they were pointed out.
Sure.
It was abusive. I understand that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that has changed.
It has.
In comedy clubs.
But we're behaving as though it hasn't changed.
Exactly.
And there is this weird thing that I'm seeing so often now is people being offended on other people's behalf, and the people themselves rarely are. I mean, it's like when, in fact, ages ago there was, is it Dennis Leary did the show No Cure for Cancer about his cancer experiences, stand-up comic, and he said that after the show, people he'd get complaints saying you shouldn't joke about this. This is really offensive. He said some people came up to him and said, "I've had testicular cancer. Can you joke about that? Can you include me in this?"
Of course.
So that happens as well. But have you ever experienced like yourselves, people being offended on someone else?
When you're doing the Edinburgh Fringe, the first week, a lot of locals will come during the preview week because the tickets are less. And
not saying anything about Scottish people being
they're gorgeous. No, it's fine. And who doesn't love a guy in a skirt? Sorry, trans. Anyway, so yes, when you're there performing, and you know this, in the front row, often during that week, you'll have a lot of handy-capable people in the front row in their chairs, and they want you to include them in the show. So I've had to write 10 or 15 minutes about them being there. I'm not going to ignore them. I'm not going to be like, sometimes I see comics in this country, middle-class white male comics, in the front row, white couple, skip the black couple, skip the handy-capable person, skip the brown person, go white couple. Because
you can see why, though. Like, they're nervous about...
But it's their job.
But then I find that incredibly offensive incredibly racist and homophobic that they feel, I can't...
Better not.
People are so desperate to say what they think is the right thing, which I find so disingenuous if they don't actually think that way.
Your job is to make...
Honestly.
Yes, and make who you are understandable to a room full of strangers.
Yeah.
So have you ever had a situation where someone has been... Well, I know you have, Scott. You've had it quite... In fact, you've had some...
Glasgow Stand, a young chap who was very sadly terminally ill with cancer. He was only in his early 20s, and that was his wish. He was in a wheelchair. He was very, very ill.
Yeah.
Came with his friends. They were all wearing Team Chris T-shirts, and specifically requested the comedians, asked the staff to ask comedians to rip the out of him.
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean? It was that thing going, and I stayed away from it. I was,
you would probably.
I was like, I don't think I've got any cancer jokes. Do you know what I mean? I do now, but that's only because
you had to write them for the event. I mean, I know because.
But you know, the Reverend Obadiah Steppenwolf III. I mean, I do remember him going, you know, I mean, and he went to town on it, and absolutely, the boy was poorless laughing, and then women went and complained, wrote a letter of complaint, and tried to get the Reverend Obadiah banned from universities because it was heard he had been.
Did they know
so
this person
awful.
the subject of the joke either?
But what they didn't know was that the boy had specifically requested it.
Right.
So all they saw was a performer going hell for leather.
The problem is
at
people,
this young boy.
they're drawn. You know, I was doing a show a few years ago.
That's how easy it happened.
And the Guardian sent somebody in to watch the show, and I did some jokes about an ethnic community, and a woman freaked out and stormed out. And instead of the Guardian staying and watching the show, they followed her out about her opinion. And the article became about her.
Right.
So the problem is that sometimes the media sources, they choose what they think is the most vitriolic and where there's the most frisson. And they can sell papers. And I think you've talked about that on this show. What that sets up is, you mentioned it earlier, is a society that isn't actually what you're labeling it. There isn't actually that conflict that you're creating by telling people that conflict exists.
I also think that unless you're in the room of a stand-up gig, you don't know what the context is.
No idea.
Absolutely. And it's what we would term old-fashioned gossip, isn't it? It grows arms and legs.
This is also why comedians probably shouldn't tweet as well, because the context is removed.
And it's perfectly fine for someone to storm out. I don't mind. I don't care if people are offended. That's their position they've paid. We've won already. But I think
you've got the money,
right? But to say that one perspective outside the other 59 that were in that room enjoying the show is the perspective.
No.
And this is what we need to worry about and focus on. I think that's dangerous, actually.
And misrepresenting what people are saying and what people are thinking.
It makes comics cowards.
You know, and it does make comics cowards. And if you don't have the guts to stand up for yourself, you certainly don't have the guts to stand up.
Well, it's the last place we can talk about stuff, I think, in front of people, where we can try and settle things. I'm not saying every show should be about this, but we can try to work stuff out.
Sorry.
Well, you know, I could literally talk about this for hours.
Yeah,
I just think it is utterly fascinating.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.